There's just something really satisfying about growing crops and just doing the little domestic activities that you do in these kind of games.
There's something really interesting to me about the rise of farming RPGs, and I think it has something to do with the fact that we experienced farming and agriculture and all these outdoorsy things almost exclusively through our screens. More on that later. However, I think the rise of these cozy farming games runs a little deeper than that. I think it has something fundamentally to do with the fact that the depictions of farming and agriculture and the countryside, as depicted in games like Stardew Valley, actually run counter to the realities of farming in the real world. To begin to answer this question, let's start with an idea. It's called the rural idyll. Idyll. How do you?
Idle.
Idyll. The rural idyll. But to even begin to explore this idea of the rural idyll, let's change the scene. So, what is the rural idyll? It's basically just a fancy way of describing the ideals and stereotypes and tropes that describe country living. It's wholesome and bucolic, community-based, it's cottagecore in a nutshell, and it's all over Stardew Valley. You've got red barns and silos full of hay, and you've got hand tools and locally owned stores. Stardew Valley is as idyllic as it gets. But the rural idyll long predates Stardew Valley. The separation between urban and rural and agricultural and non-agricultural, it dates back to since civilization was a thing. In fact, the Greeks and the Romans were the first ones to conceive of it, so it's largely a Western idea. Poets like Virgil wrote poems about the tranquility of nature. In fact, I have one here for you today. It's from the Eclogues, and I think it's in Latin. Hoc ipsi potem venient per prata. I can't do this. I sound like I'm a dwarf or something. Okay, here's an English translation so I don't sound like a dwarf. Here, young bulls will come through the meadows to drink of their own accord. Here, the river borders its green banks with delicate reeds, and out of the sacred oak, swarming bees hum. Now, if there's anything that sounds like a rural idyll, that's pretty much what it is. These early artistic representations of the rural idyll have created this set of tropes and images about good country living that have endured over time. Literally after thousands of years of change, just an onslaught of market forces, societal changes, technological developments, urbanization, philosophies, capitalism. And all this to say, this rural idyll has shown up in a little farming RPG game called Stardew Valley. That is crazy. And it's crazy because Stardew Valley is a farming game. And I have a sneaking suspicion that very few Stardew Valley players are actually farmers. These depictions of the countryside and of agriculture, well, we experience that all through media, through movies and TV shows and games. Hold on, there's a term for this. Dr. Leanne Sutherland from the James Hutton Institute, she calls it the desk chair countryside.
What I mean by the desk chair countryside is it's just a descriptive for a cohort who experience farming and rural life primarily through their computer screens.
Which is basically just a subtle roast to gamers who haven't seen the sun in 3 days. But the desk chair countryside is actually a really important idea. There's this global cohort of gamers who have never actually experienced the land that creates their food. The only exposure that we have to farming is through interactive media, like Stardew Valley. It makes sense though. More people live in urban areas than rural areas, and this trend is expected to continue. As humans urbanize, we're losing touch with the actual land and agricultural centers that produce our food. But this begs a different question. What is agrarianism? Okay, just for context, I'm in the southeast region of Taiwan right now, and behind me is a red bean field, and in front of me are palm trees and mango trees, and if there's any good place to talk about agrarianism, it's here. So, what is agrarianism? There's actually two types. There is classical and there's critical. I want to talk first about the classical, traditional conceptions of agrarianism because I think they're more relevant to Stardew Valley, but we will touch on critical agrarianism in a bit. The basic idea of classical agrarianism is that farming is not just a job or an occupation, but it's a way of life. It's an all-encompassing lifestyle. The work you do on the fields, it nourishes you, it nourishes your family and your community, and it also nourishes your character and your soul, your being. Okay, so through my research, I've distilled classical agrarianism into 5 basic concepts. It's environmental, it's moral, it's generational, it's independent, and it's community-based. So obviously the environment and nature is super important to Stardew Valley. It's all over the art, it's part of the quest you do, you're a farmer. The generational aspect is a really important part of the game too, since you're inheriting the farm from your grandfather, and there's a sense of family duty in that respect. The moral aspect is a really interesting part of classical agrarianism because it implies that the work is morally or ethically important. There's a set of social responsibilities, and it's also just about really true and pure good work, hard work in the field. Independence is also another important part of classical agrarianism. There's this idea that farmers are independent and work for themselves, sustain themselves. I mean, in Stardew Valley, you're not part of some larger conglomerate. You don't belong to any larger group or union or company. You just create the crops for yourself and you sustain yourself that way. And it's the same case with classical agrarianism. And then the last is community-based. Obviously, community is so important in Stardew Valley, and so is the case with classical agrarianism. There's this focus on tight-knit communities, and that's important, as you'll see in farming communities, as well as Pelican Town. So environmental, generational, independent, moral, and community-based. This classical conception of agrarianism pushes farming as a positive force in the environment, in the family, in the community, and also in the moral character of everyone involved. Of course, like the rural idol, classical agrarianism is an idealization. It's romanticizing ideas about farming and pastoral life that are no longer viable or realistic. So, to explore these idealized conceptions in Stardew Valley, and to dig a little further into what classical agrarianism really looks like, let's do a quick analysis of how livestock works in terms of game mechanics and game design. So the overarching point here is that in Stardew Valley, animals that you keep on the farm, like cows and sheep and pigs and dinosaurs and ostriches and chickens, they are 2 things at the same time. They are livestock, but at the same time, they're also pets. You buy them as babies and you feed them and you pet them to make an emotional bond, but at the same time, you take their eggs and you take their milk and you extract a profit. On the pet side of things, animals in Stardew are designed so that you form emotional bonds. It's not just some nameless cow bred for slaughter, it's Go-Gurt, and she's here to love you and give you milk forever. Over time, as you pet your animals, you develop hearts with them. The game will tell you how your animals are doing. Froyo is looking happy. Foie Gras the duck is looking grumpy. These animals are anthropomorphized to elicit feelings of sympathy and love and connection, and even maybe some guilt when you don't feed them enough. On the livestock side of things, they are still livestock. You know, they produce goods that you can sell, and by cultivating happy livestock, you get bigger and better produce. This means that there's a sort of moral impetus behind barn animals in Stardew. It merges the pet cow that you love and the cattle that gives you the milk. Rhoda Wilkie, a researcher at the University of Aberdeen, has a name for this. She calls it the sentient commodity, something with sentience and self-agency that is also saleable. The idea of the sentient commodity directly aligns with these idealistic notions of agrarianism. The happy, free-range cow on the ranch, grazing happily in open expanses of grass, and still simultaneously a producer of milk, both a sentient animal and a commodity. So the sentient commodity is actually a really interesting way to analyze Stardew Valley for its classical romanticized farming, as well as the parts of industry that are not so fun. You have the ability to make emotional bonds with your pets. And at the same time, you can construct your farm in a way where you extract the most profit from these cute little animals. Admittedly and unfortunately, happy grazing cows and calves like you'll see on your carton of milk, that's just not how the industry works anymore. So maybe these idealized depictions of farming hold no water in real life. However, there are cases where these historic ideals have real effects on the real world. Now, here's a really interesting example, and I'll link it back to Stardew Valley in just a second. These ideas of family-owned farms and community-based approaches to agriculture are really important parts of classical agrarianism. But over time, they've become really concrete things. Things like land ownership and land deeds and inheritance practices. Now, if that sounds familiar in the land of farming RPGs, you'd be right. The entire thing of Stardew Valley is that you're inheriting this farm from your grandfather. This is actually crazy if you think about it, because all farming RPGs are based off of this premise. The grandfather of farming RPGs, Harvest Moon, that's the whole deal. You're inheriting this farm from your grandfather. And Harvest Moon's predecessors are the same. Games like Kinseed, No Place Like Home, whatever Garden Pause is, even Heyday, it's all based off of this practice of inheriting the farm from the older generation in your family. This trope in farming games originates from these idealized notions in agrarianism, and of course, we see it in Stardew Valley. If we take a closer look at Grandpa's letter, we can see exactly what's happening between classical agrarianism and family heritage. He writes, "This was my most precious gift of all, and now it's yours. I know you'll honor the family name." Just before this, Grandpa says something super interesting in his letter, and it leads right into my next point. He tells you that he needed a drastic change, and that something had happened to him, and he craved real connection with real people. He dropped everything and moved to the place he truly belonged. So, we talked about agrarianism, and we've talked about the rural idyll, and we've talked about how these ideas play really well into Stardew Valley and the larger genre of farming RPGs. But I think there's a deeper discussion that needs to be had about why these ideas are so compelling in the first place. And it leads to a deeper question. Why are we drawn to the countryside? And why do we decide to stay? But first, I need a snack. Okay, so there's three ways that this happens: boat holes, castles, and life rafts. Kevin Hafficree, the guy that made these up, he calls them rural consumption practices, and that's just a fancy way of saying how we live in the countryside. Let's start with boat holes, which is just another way of saying hiding place. When you start the game, you get a glimpse into the urban life of Zuzu City. He works in an office, and it's just for this mega corporation Joja. It's gray, it's dark, it's terribly depressing. So boat holes represent an escape from the toxicity of urban life. You're running away from this soul-sucking job and the drudgery of city life, and you're running towards a life of bliss in the countryside. The bolt hole is the entire premise of Stardew Valley, of escaping the urban life. The second is castles. If you imagine a castle wall, it is a fortification. It's meant to defend. And that's exactly what castles are in the sense of countryside. It's a way to defend against the urban pressures. In the context of Stardew, it would be like the Joja Corporation and choosing the community center over that. This castle is the core narrative of Stardew Valley, of choosing between CC and Joja. The central question is, do we allow these urban influences to come into the countryside, or do we fight them off? The third is Life Raft, and as it implies, it's a sort of temporary escape from the rigors of the city life. Just people looking for a temporary respite from city living. In Stardew Valley, this might look like the tourists and the visitors you see at the fair. But in a deeper way, and this kind of calls back to the desk chair countryside, Stardew Valley is in itself a kind of life raft. What I mean by this is that Stardew Valley is a sort of virtual escape into rural places. So, to review, there's the bolt hole, the castle, and the life raft. These are the ways that we conceptualize living and consuming rural life. And this actually gets actively explored in Stardew Valley as well. For example, when you talk to Leah for the first time, she'll ask you why you became a farmer. There are 4 answers available. To make a ton of money is the shallow answer. But the 3 other answers call back to this idea of the rural idyll and the bolt hole. It's more than living in the city, a focus on authentic living, with emphasis on real as better and fuller and more genuine. To follow in Grandpa's footsteps, the generational aspect, the heritage that is so embedded in classical agrarianism and the rural idyll. And finally, to escape my old life, textbook bolt hole, fleeing from the drudgery, immorality, and grayness of urban living. Of course, there's a lot that Stardew Valley doesn't get right about agriculture. So, what does Stardew get wrong? Now we're in the territory of critical agrarianism, which is what I was hinting at before. Now, critical agrarianism contends with the realities of farming, the moral dubiousness of the industry, the mental health issues, the environmental issues, things like water pollution, social justice, income inequality, poverty, all the sides of the farming industry that are really hidden from plain sight. Modern agriculture is big. It's way bigger than the plot of land that you see when you open a new save file in Stardew Valley. So it kind of goes without saying that the produce you buy from your grocery store is not coming from a local farm with free-range chickens and ponds and wells and a cute little rustic farmhouse in the back. However, I don't think that these idealized notions in Stardew Valley are harmful or problematic. I have myself felt more than once the pull towards the countryside. Living in a loud city, it kind of makes you feel that way. I think the difference is that we shouldn't interpret these projections of farm life as truth, because the realities are just so completely different. The reality of modern agriculture is far less rosy than what you'll see playing Stardew Valley, but I think there is a place to be socially and morally responsible if we can play the game and it causes us to reflect on where we eat our food, where it comes from. Then maybe there is a place for some good here. But at the end of the day, Stardew Valley is just a game. It's escapism. It's a chance to transport yourself to another world where cows can be your friends and the crops will always grow. Classical agrarianism is dated, and the rural idyll it's an idyll. As members of the Desk Chair Countryside, all we can really do is appreciate the game for its coziness and the countryside and the nostalgia, and leave the rest to the real farmers. If you're still watching here, well, thanks for watching all the way through. I really appreciate it. I put a lot into this video and I hope you got something out of it. If you have anything to add, feel free to leave a comment below and subscribe if you want to. This is going to be a personal channel where I make videos and documentaries and whatever about things I find interesting. And if you want to tag along, you're more than welcome to. Again, thanks for watching.